Hello and welcome to the Sisterhood Club podcast, where we empower women with all the tools they need to succeed across life, business and career. We'll bring inspiring stories and practical advice from CEOs, founders and women who are achieving incredible things. So join us and let's shape our futures together. Tova, welcome to the Sisterhood Club podcast. We were just talking before we press record about how excited that we are to have you on the podcast today. 10 years, over 10 years at Google is a long, long time. And Pam and I are really excited to get into this conversation today and talk to you. So for the audience that maybe don't know who you are, what you've been up to the last 10 years, could you give us a little bit of an introduction into who you are, your role, your journey, and we'll go from there. So over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you both so much for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this. I think I'm going to start with my pre-Google life, which is very non-traditional, because so often people ask, like, how did you end up where you are? Did you always have a plan? And the answer is I did not have a plan. I actually studied global health when I was in university and spent time living in East Africa. I came back to the US. I was dancing with a repertory company when I was at school in New York and trained as an emergency medical technician, and then left New York, went out to California. I started cooking professionally and then got into the not-for-profit space. So after 7 years doing fundraising for not-for-profits, wanted to break into the corporate world, didn't know how to do it. So I went to business school, and it was coming out of business school is actually my MBA internship that landed me at Google, and have been at Google for the last almost 11 years, working across people and culture, leading teams of recruiters who've hired over 2,000 people. I worked in the US and then came to Australia 2.5 years ago on day 2 of Melbourne lockdown. So it was a perfect time to land in Australia. But I love it so much. And as of last week, have actually just left Google to launch my own business called Series Build, which is all about supporting startups in Australia and helping them hire, especially with a focus on bringing more diversity and representation into the startup space.
Amazing. Okay. So there's so much in that, because a lot of people that we speak to, especially women, often ask us about how to transition careers, how to, go from where they are now to where they want to be. And it sounds to me that you didn't really know at the start of your career what you really wanted to do. So you're just trying lots of different things. Then you're just like, I want to get into the corporate. Where do I begin? So you went to business school, and then you obviously got into Google. So what was that journey like for you to go just I guess day one at Google, like that's such a big moment. And how did you even get the job? I'm curious, because I've heard that Google obviously do have quite, very high standards for the people that they hire. So what did that look like?
Yeah, it was, it blew my mind. I couldn't believe. I just kept having these pinch me moments. I couldn't believe that I was having this opportunity to join Google. And with my internship offer, it was actually quite different. That one happened very, very quickly. It was my full-time offer when I graduated from business school that I went through the whole full Google process, tons of interviews, a case study, lots of due diligence done. And I think, like a lot of people who often feel a sense of imposter syndrome, kept thinking, they must have gotten it wrong. I don't know why they let me in. Everyone here is so accomplished and amazing. Do I really belong here? But after, almost 11 years, I think one of the things I found is so often we all feel that to some extent. Even very senior leaders who I worked with would tell me how nervous they would feel before they would get up and speak in front of the company. We all feel that. And it was really about taking risks, doing what I loved, finding opportunities where I could do something hard and learn something, even if it didn't turn out that well. And some of the projects I worked on didn't turn out all that well, but I learned so much and I got to work with amazing people.
That is amazing. And I think the key point in there is that it's not failure, it's learning. And one of the key things that I heard just when you were explaining your life journey at the start is that you obviously crave experiences and change and growth. And I think that is something that is very unique, right? Not everyone has got that appetite for risk, I suppose. Living in different countries and just grabbing opportunities when they come around and really trying a lot of different things. Now, I'm just interested because that's obviously from your younger years, into sort of adulthood as well. How do you feel like the experiences that you've been exposed to over the years has almost shaped your character? And what would you say are those key character traits that you feel have contributed to success in your career?
So I think when I was more junior in my career, it was really about my accomplishments and what I was doing. And I was really focusing on doing well and having wins and being able to point to something that had really high impact. I just wanted to have big impact and make a difference. And I think as I've kind of progressed in my career, those characteristics are much less around the work and the impact and much more so around the relationships and the people. It's really around the difference that I had with my team or the impact I had on somebody or how I helped someone progress in their career or a coaching conversation. Because after being in one company for so long, it was amazing how many people, even at the end of my journey, I was connected to from a decade earlier. And those relationships are everything. So I think how you treat people, how you collaborate, how you work together. I think there are a lot of lessons that I probably learned the hard way when I was younger, when I was focused on the work. And now it's really so much of what I do, almost everything I do is really just focused on the people.
100%. You've obviously managed a team of 45 recruiters, and we were talking before we jumped onto this that Pam and I are like, that's impressive because a lot of personalities. Now, I'd love to know, and this is I'm going to be making notes here myself, but how did you go about that? Like, what was the sort of a day-to-day look like for you? How you're managing lots of different personalities. How did you go about that? I'm just really curious to learn how you went about 45 recruiters. That's insane.
Well, it started as a team of 4, and then we grew and grew and had the opportunity then, of course, to manage managers who are managing the 45 and doing the heavy lifting. So the credit really goes to those managers who are managing those folks. But I think each team faces different challenges. So the first team that I managed, it was very much around operational rigor, because we had to come in, we had very high expectations, very high volume, very challenging focus, and we really needed a level of operational rigor. And I was coming in to fill that piece. The last team that I worked with was really around culture. I mean, over the last 6-9 months, we've gone through a crazy change in our economic climate, a ton of uncertainties, lots of layoffs, and lots of kind of stress that people are feeling. So really, how do we manage people's experience? And knowing that people's experience inside of work has such a huge impact on their experience outside of work. And so as a manager, you're one of the few people who has the opportunity to have such a huge impact on people's lives. And for good and for bad, like we've all had those amazing managers who've made life great, not just work great, but life great. Yeah. And many of us have had those really lousy managers who just put a whole dark cloud over you all the time. And so thinking about, what are the characteristics that the team needs? And then also what are the characteristics that each of my direct reports needs? And I think a lesson that I learned early on when I started managing is I tried to be kind of this one type of manager, and I tried to be that for everybody. And what I realized is that because each of my direct reports were so different, I was expecting them to adapt to me, and I wasn't adapting to them. And so now I'm trying to think more about what is it that each of these individuals need, and how can I adapt my style to them versus expecting that they adapt to me.
That is absolutely beautiful. And a few things that you've mentioned there have really hit home with me. And I think one of the things that you mentioned was just around standards and expectations. And I think that's one of the key things. If I sort of reflect on one of the best managers that I have had in my entire career, he had incredibly high standards and expectations of everyone, but everyone knew exactly where they stood. Mm-hmm. So that in turn really encouraged me to have my own high standards and expectations on myself, which just really gave me such a drive to show up and be the best version of myself every single day. And in turn, I was achieving, I was hitting the goals that I wanted for myself, and also, exceeding the expectations of my leader and my manager at the time. So I think as long as everyone understands what it is that their individual contribution has to be and what the standards and the expectations are, I think it leaves no room for people being uncertain or uncomfortable. And I think that's great leadership. So I love that you've absolutely had that approach. But I think sometimes if I reflect on the managers that I've maybe not been as strong, that's probably what's been lacking. I've not really been clear on what are the standards and the expectations here. What are you really looking for from me? So I love what you've said there. That's really hit home.
Yeah. I think that's the whole thing about kind candor. And actually, a lot of managers don't want to have the hard conversations, but sometimes you need to have them in order actually to be kind, because the worst thing you can do is just let someone go and they're like, what's going on? I don't know what I've done wrong. So I think that is all part of good management and good leadership. But when I was reading your story as well, what really struck me is the amount of roles that you have had throughout your time at Google. 9 roles, 14 managers across 2 countries, right? That's quite the career. And you also mentioned that in those roles, you basically came in and shaped them because some of them didn't even exist. Now, there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are very career driven, that maybe identify gaps in a business that go, I'd love to do something about that, but maybe they don't know where to get started or they don't know how to approach. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, there's this concept. I think I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I was working at a big company, and then I learned about this concept called intrapreneurship. Like, how can you take on that mindset inside a company? And there's just one example. There was a new team that was going to be created. It was this very like sexy, glamorous type of team that everyone wanted to work on because it was working on a bunch of global challenges. And I reached out to the vice president who was going to be starting up this team. And she's based in London, and I was in San Francisco at the time. And I reached out to her with this, really what I thought was a really nice note saying, I'm super excited about what you're building. I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to help build this team. And she replied back in this very thoughtful way, but she basically said, yeah, well, you and everybody else. Oh. And it's true. Everyone wanted to work on this. And I thought, you know what? I'm not just going to leave it at that. So I put together a little deck for her of these slides of how I would structure the team, how I would think about our objectives and how I would structure the roles and how many and what we'd work on and how to do it. And I sent that to her. I said, really excited about this. Gave it some thought, wanted to share this with you. And she wrote me back and she said, I'm going to be in San Francisco tomorrow. Can you meet? And we ended up connecting. And I was the first person she brought onto that team. And then I helped her to kind of build out that team. And so it was the type of thing where sometimes you might see opportunities and not taking no for an answer. It wasn't quite a no. It just wasn't an invitation, and having to be a little bit bold and advocate for yourself. And I think that goes for a lot of things. It's just being able to speak up and say, I really want this. Or, there was this one role that I wanted and I was not ready for it. And I was not really qualified to do it. But I had this incredible sponsor who was leading the team who said, come into this role and I've got your back. You're going to learn a ton. I'm going to help you. But raise your hand and come into this role. So I think so often we have to raise our hand for those things that are, we say at Google, uncomfortably excited, which is like this phrase that's supposed to be wonderful. It's still really freaking uncomfortable. And so just getting used to raising your hand, knowing people might say no, but people can't say yes if you don't throw your hand in there.
100%.
There's just so much in there. Like that is self-belief, self-confidence, drive, ambition, hunger. Literally every single thing that I've just mentioned there is obviously oozing out of your approach and how you've actually taken the reins and really driven your own career within the walls of Google. So I want to say a huge shout out to you, because that is such an achievement, and it's not happened by accident. You have been in the driving seat and making sure that you're pushing your own career forward, and that is huge kudos to you. These are the types of skill sets and the softer skills that are probably really hard to define. when you're interviewing people. And it's something that when we're interviewing people, we often sit down and we're like, right, okay, what sort of softer skills have really stood out to you based on the way that we interviewed these people? Like what answers did you like? And let's unpack that, because that's ultimately what companies are looking for. They're looking for people that are outside of the box thinkers, people that have got that self-belief and that self-confidence. And if you really want to drive your career, you need to frame out what you want. You need to frame out what it is that you're looking for in order to make sure that you hit the milestones for your own career. You are in charge. So just to sort of take it back to the current market, and a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this podcast this week, Tova, are potentially going to be finding themselves on the job market. And not just on the job market by choice. There have been quite a number of redundancies in the market at the moment that have literally happened overnight and came out of the blue. And a lot of people are going to be approaching the market potentially with their confidence a little bit dented, which is just really sad at the moment. So having been involved in really driving your own career, you've also been involved with hiring some of the best talent the world over. What makes the best candidates stand out, and what would be some of the best practices for people that are starting that interviewing process at the moment in order to be able to stand out and stay top of mind with the hiring managers?
Yeah, I guess two things. One is to start with kind of a note to folks who've been laid off. And we went through this at Google globally with layoffs. They're so painful. And what I think we all learned, everybody in the workforce learned with this recent round of, in the last kind of year or so, is that it wasn't personal. I think historically there's this idea of, low performers are laid off. And I think if this, like what is happening with the economy has shown anything, it's some of the strongest people I have worked with were a part of the layoffs. And it's not because of them. It doesn't define who they are. It's not because of their performance or their capability. So I think that's one thing to just remember, is that, jobs never define who we are. But the idea of being laid off also in no way defines what you're capable of. I guess another piece is when you look at job descriptions. So there's a lot of research that was done around this with how men and women look at job descriptions. And of course, gender is not binary, but a lot of the research is done around this binary lens of gender. And women will often want to meet 90 to 100% of the requirements before they apply for a job, whereas men will often want to meet about 60% of the requirements before they apply for a job. And I do a ton of workshops, this workshop called I Am Remarkable, all around self-promotion and imposter syndrome. And I'll ask people in the room, and people from all different backgrounds, what percentage of the job requirements do you want to hit? And those numbers are consistent. So I guess one note of advice for job seekers is when you look at a job description and you think, you're going through those little bullets and you're like, yep, I've done that. Yep, I can do that. Oh, haven't done that yet. Nope, not really, or kind of. Go for it. Just go for it. Let them say no. Don't say no for them, because you have 100% chance of not getting the job if you don't apply. So I guess the first piece is just go for it, because your peers will be going for it. So I guess that's the first piece to really think about there. And also to go into the interviews, whatever it is that gets you pumped up. So like I have like my favorite song, I'll do power posing, I'll dance around, like whatever it is that helps you feel confident and empowered, do that before your interviews. And go in and tell your story. Know that from the perspective of the hiring manager or the recruiter, they desperately want to find a fit. They really want you to work. They want it to work out, but you need to help them see how you can be a fit. So understand what they're looking for, understand the characteristics, and then take stories from your past, even if they don't quite match exactly, and help fit them into the vision of what's important to this hiring manager.
Brilliant advice.
Really
And it was actually a stat that Pam and I are constantly just talking about. And it's something that we've been very aware of in our recruitment careers of like women only apply for jobs when they hit that 90 to 100%. So, when we're sort of speaking to companies, we're saying, look, be very careful about how you're writing a job description. Don't say must have this, must have that, because if women don't have 5 or 10 years experience, they're not going to apply. And a lot of our clients right now are desperately trying to hire more diversity into their teams. And then I'm clicking onto their job ads. I'm thinking, well, let's start there, right? Because that needs to change. So you're very passionate as we are about that whole diversity and inclusion piece. It is such a topic with all of our clients right now and just the working world in general. But Pam and I are very passionate, having worked in technology for the last sort of 10 years, to get more women into tech, because I think that's where a lot of the jobs are going to be. There's a huge push right now to really diversify teams in technology. But how has Google gone about hiring for diversity? What's some lessons that you've learned through that, and any advice for HR professionals, people and culture professionals that are really struggling right now to diversify their talent pool? Where should they begin?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the job description piece, which you mentioned. And it's so interesting because we know this research, advising companies to change how they write job descriptions is really key. So at Google, we have such high volume in our hiring. So we are able to do tons of experiments, and we love data. And so we changed how we wrote job descriptions. It used to be that we had these very, very long job descriptions with like 1 million bullets of what you needed to be able to, the experience you needed in order to get the job. And we ended up changing, and we found the sweet spot for us was about 4 bullet points of required skills. And when we changed job descriptions, we saw an 11% increase in female applications.
Wow.
Just by changing how we wrote the job descriptions.
Okay.
So you can think about like the impact you're having at top of the funnel. You're going out, you're sourcing, you're trying to get referrals, you're doing all of this stuff. And to your point, just changing the way you write your job descriptions might make a difference. I've also seen a lot of companies now add a line at the bottom of their job descriptions that says something along the lines of, we know this research and we know that you might not meet all the requirements. If you're really passionate about this role, we still encourage you to apply.
Awesome.
So I think there's some things that the companies can do from that perspective. And then, kind of there are other pieces that we've learned, maybe kind of 3 other pieces that we'll often think about. So one is this idea of like best, not first. So often we'll think of who is the first person to get through the door or who is the first person, but we really want the best person for the role. And that takes a lot of work up front in your sourcing and in the top of the funnel to make sure that you're bringing a representative pool of candidates through that you can consider. And you should choose the best person for the role, irrespective of who they are. But that's not always the first person. So thinking about, and sometimes for more non-traditional candidates, whether it's because of, their diversity, because of their background, maybe a little bit non-traditional for the role you're looking for, it might take a little bit longer to find them, to convince them to apply, to get them in. And so really thinking about this best, not first piece. Another one is around the questions that you ask. There's the hypothetical questions and behavioral. So often we'll ask these behavioral questions and, tell me about a time when. And people love those, and you get to hear about people's experience, and that's great. And then there are the hypothetical questions, which is, you get to throw out a problem. You have to throw out some kind of challenge and hear how that person would solve it. Hypothetical questions often bring in better indicators for non-traditional candidates because you don't have to have had that very specific experience in order to answer that question well. So if someone doesn't have, the type of performance marketing experience you're looking for, but you ask them a really kind of challenging question around what's happening with your performance marketing, and they have a really great answer, it shows you how they would think through the problem, even if they haven't quite done it before. Whereas if you had asked them a behavioral question about, tell me about a time where you ran a behavioral marketing campaign, they might not be able to shine through a question like that. So really balancing those 2 pieces. And then the last piece is having a structured interview process. And this is probably one of the best ways to eliminate bias. And we could talk all day about bias, love talking about bias, but having a structured interview process and really making sure you're asking the same questions to every candidate for a role so that you're not letting bias creep in.
Amazing. But before we sort of go down, because I feel as though the diversity and inclusion piece is so important. But before we sort of go down that route, one thing that I often think when we are recruiting is that it's our role. We actually have a talent solutions firm, and we see it as our role to make sure that we are setting our candidates up for success, and we're providing as much information as we can to make them feel as though they're going into an interview very prepared. And that comes from like whether it be the technical questions, but also those softer skills, behavioural type questions, how they can prepare for those, what types of things they might want to think about for going in to give, an appealing response. On the flip side of that, I often feel that people are put into hiring capacities and they are just like, there's an open role, you need to fill this for your team, boom, start interviewing. How important do you feel it is for people that are going to be, stepping into leadership roles, stepping into team management roles? How important do you think it is for companies to make sure that they're actually setting these hiring managers up for success, and hiring managers are able to ask and elicit, the right responses from the candidates to make sure that they're providing a great interviewing experience? Sometimes I feel really sorry for candidates that actually, I feel as though they're almost set up for failure. If people go in, they just ask one question and a candidate might feel a bit uncomfortable answering it, trip up, they're a bit nervous. And then the hiring manager would think, nah, not got that, and not think to really coach the good answer out of them. So how important do you feel it is for a company to take ownership of the interviewing process, make sure that their leaders are actually trained on how to interview for success?
Yeah, it's so important. I'm actually just working with a startup now and helping them kind of revamp their hiring process. But one of the things they said was, we want to make sure that all employees, not just hiring managers, all employees across the company are trained to interview. We want everyone to not just know our process, but know those tips, know about bias, think about those things. I mean, like some of the research will show that we'll make these split decisions about people. We'll make a decision in the first 90 seconds of meeting them. Yeah. And in an interview, then you spend the rest of the interview trying to confirm your belief that you've had in the first 90 seconds, which is usually small talk. It's usually something around, their appearance or their background or where they're from. None of the stuff that you actually want to know. And there are so many things. I think everyone thinks they're a great interviewer. And when I first started hiring, I was like, I know people. I like people. I think I'm a great interviewer. And I was an awful interviewer. Awful. And there were so many things that I think that I did and that others do that make us really terrible interviewers. And affinity bias, I think, is a really big one, is we're kind of wired to like people like us. So it's like, oh, you have a similar experience. Oh, you came from a similar school or background or job. But there's so many things that we can do. And this is definitely a trainable skill. And it's not hard. It's usually just blind spots that we need to help remove. So yes, putting hiring managers and employees through, it can be a very simple interview training, is really important. And it's not, yes, for candidate experience, for sure, but it's really so that you're getting the best indicators. Like so often we'll work so hard to bring in great candidates into the process, and then we just kind of flub it up with bad interviewing. We want to make sure, for example, if you're asking an interview question, and I think your example that you gave is a really good one, the candidate is nervous or they're not sure or they just kind of fall flat. There are so many things you can do to prompt them, to probe, to ask follow-up questions, or just to know to move on and then not kind of hold that question against them. So yes, there's a lot of training that can go into this that can be really helpful.
It's such a skill, isn't it? Because again, that probing, it's almost like we do it for a living. Like now we've got a podcast, we're just naturally just sort of having conversations. And I think that, interviews is just, it really is kind of like, we do need to shake it up a bit. We do need to really sort of start having conversations. Like, we even had a situation the other day, and I won't name the client or anything, but a woman went in for an interview, and it was two men that were interviewing the woman. And the feedback was she wasn't very confident. She didn't come across that she'd be able to handle the pressure in this role. And I'm thinking, well, for a start, you're two men interviewing a woman. Did you not think to put a female there as well? Because straight away, that can be intimidating, right? And like you said at the start about bias, we all have it, right? And I was saying to someone the other day, it doesn't make you a bad person, but once you're aware of something, you have the power to change it. So when you sort of look at bias, like, because I'm sure, like, there's people listening to this that like are aware that they might have some bias. How can we work with that? How can we, make sure that we're not just, discarding people because they don't look, sound, have our beliefs, like how can we begin to really work on that?
Well, in interviewing, that structured interview process makes all the difference, because not only are you then asking the same questions, you have the same way of assessing them. So often we'll go through, a rubric of like, what does great look like with this question? Or what am I really looking for? If I say I want someone who thrives in ambiguity, what am I actually looking for in terms of what thrives in ambiguity looks like? And when you sit down at the end of an interview to assess someone against all those things, you may not have had a good gut feel during the interview, but then they start to tick your boxes and you think, okay, well, this person actually did tick the boxes. All right, what am I missing? Where's the bias? Or vice versa. You leave and you're like, oh man, I love that person. They were amazing. And then you go through and you're like, actually, I really didn't see how they supported their team. Actually, I really didn't see how, they took feedback well. And so having a rubric that you can assess against that's consistent for everyone, consistent questions in the process, that structure is one of the best ways to remove bias.
That's really good advice. I think as well, like, you must have so many just processes and things that you've just learned through Google, because when you're hiring that amount of volume of people, you need to have those systems and processes in place. So now that you're going in and consulting startups, and I'd love to hear more about, the next chapter for you, but what are you taking from Google and all of those lessons, and how are you going to apply it to those smaller companies that you're now going to be coaching? I think there's so much value in what you've experienced over the last 11 years. So how are you going to now apply that to smaller businesses?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I love about Google is we open source a lot of the research that we've done, and we make it public and accessible to everyone so that everyone can improve their processes. So something like those job descriptions, even something like how Google interviews is publicly known. We assess across 4 areas, which are leadership, a values fit, which we call Googliness, general cognitive ability, which is like problem solving, and domain expertise. 4 interviews, and that's it. We used to do, historically, there were like 10, 12, 20 interviews or whatever. And then we were like, actually, the research shows it was just 4. And also the research shows that one of those interviews was by far way more important as an indicator of success than the others. And we had a hypothesis. Our hypothesis was that the domain experts, if you find people who are so good at what they do, they will be the most successful when they join the company. But that wasn't at all the case. Any guesses as to what was the case?
I'm going to go leadership, maybe. I don't know. That's my gut, but Pam, what would you say?
What was the values,
problem solving, leadership?
I would say the problem solving. I think that problem solving is really important. Be able to think outside the box.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, of course, all 4 are important, which are those 4 that came to the top, but it was actually problem solving ability. Wow. And then we were like, "Ooh, that was surprising. Why was it problem solving ability?" And it's because so often the role that you come into is going to change in 6 or 12 or 3 months. And now that I'm working with startups, things move even faster and they change so much more. And so for startups to be able to help give them the tools and to coach them through, how do you actually assess for great problem solving? How do you measure it? How do you ensure there's consistency around it? What are you looking for? What are you not looking for? What's going to distract you from this? And how do you find people that are not just the right fit for the role, but the right fit for how your company likes to work and who want to stay? Like, I spoke to a startup the other day and they said, "Oh my gosh, we hired our dream engineer. And 3 weeks in, this person left. And you're like, why after 3 weeks did they leave? Like something wasn't transparent enough in the process. And so also doing a lot of work with startups around helping coach them through how do you actually talk with candidates throughout the whole process to help not just assess them, but help them assess you.
Yeah. And it's not overselling. I think sometimes startups are so desperate to get the top talent and get the domain expertise right that they can potentially oversell the role and forget that in actual fact, you have got to be so honest and upfront about what the realities are when you're working in a startup and what it really looks like in your role at the moment if you want to get that retention piece right, I suppose, as well.
And sometimes I'll talk with startups and the way I'll frame it is originally was like, oh, like share all the dirty, like all that stuff. And then I realized it's more than that. It's like share the fungus, like share what's really not working about the product, share like all of it. Because if people are scared, they're going to find out once they come into the company. And if people are scared by that or don't want those types of challenges, then they're not the right fit. But for a lot of people, they're going to hear those challenges and they're going to say, ooh, that's exciting, or I want to work on that. And it doesn't mean don't share the good stuff. Definitely share all the good stuff. Like sell the vision of what you're doing, but to your point, Pam, don't be afraid to share the stuff that's not working, because that's what's really going to ensure you're finding people who are going to want to stick with you through the journey.
Perfect. And I think like problem solving, just when you unpack that, it can mean so many different things. And for me in life and in business and career, one of the fundamentals that I just think is so important is to have a solutions driven mindset. And I feel as though that can really fall under that problem solving type banner as well. And just be the type of person that is going to be nimble, and able to think quick on your feet. And if you can bring that type of attitude, and that type of skill from a software perspective into your role, that's going to be so valuable to an organization. And it's just going to help you really navigate your career and just help you sort of move forward in the direction that you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to go into a bit of a curly question now, right? Because I really am curious on your take on this, because you hear a lot of people slagging the Gen Z generation. I'm hearing problem solving, I'm hearing leadership, I'm hearing all these things. And I think that a lot of people say, oh, it's the marshmallow generation. They're too soft. They can't take feedback. They're not qualified. No resilience, no grit, no determination. And I want to give, we've hired a few Gen Zers into our business, and, they're brilliant. But, I have also met some people that maybe, don't have the resilience, don't have the grit, don't have the determination. And when I was reading your story, like the fact that you drove 3 hours a day to your place of work, right? And now people are struggling to get people back in the office 1 day a week.
To their kitchen table for a 9 a.m. meeting.
Yeah, some people can't, come into the office, with looking like an absolute scruff bag at 9 a.m. And I'm thinking, you're literally getting out of bed to the kitchen table. Come on, right? What does it take, right? Because you've had such a phenomenal career, you're now going to start your own business. In all honesty, what do you think defines success in people's careers? Do you need to have that grit, that resilience, that determination? Or do you think you can still have a great career, just sort of almost doing the bare minimum, in your personal opinion?
I think it depends on what's important to people. If people are like, you know what, I just kind of want the bare minimum. I just want my income so that I can go live my life. And career I don't place a huge value on it. I don't get a lot of meaning from it. I don't particularly care about my growth or impact. Then sure, no problem. And then be honest with yourself so that you can really enjoy that choice you've made. If you don't fall into that camp, if you are one of those more ambitious people who always wants more and wants to achieve and wants to be, maybe you want to be known, maybe you want to have a bigger impact, it does take a certain level of drive. It does take a certain level of discomfort. It does also come with a certain level of failure. I told all those stories of the things that I've done, but I could get into all sorts of stories about all of the missteps I made, all of the things that I screwed up, the things that I didn't say right, the meetings that didn't go well, the projects that failed, the people who I didn't manage as well as I should have. It always comes with that. and you don't grow when you don't learn. And when you have those massive failures, they feel awful. It's like that awful pit in your stomach, and you go home, and some people let go of it really well. I'm still working on that. So like it'll weigh on me for a while. And I have to remind myself I'm having this feeling because I'm going through some big growth. It's like I had 2 young girls, and when they go through their like growth spurts, or their leaps of development, it's like, wow, this is uncomfortable for you, but isn't this amazing that you're growing? So I think, to go back to your question, it depends what you want. But if you do want that career that plays an important role, you do want that growth, then there's a certain level of push that you need. And if it's not, if you can't self-motivate, and some people don't do that as well as others, then having a structure for accountability is really key. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a group. Having some structure for accountability is really helpful.
Gold. Because I completely agree with everything you just said there, because, and again, it's like, people are so afraid of failure. They're so afraid of things not working out. They, are quite comfortable in their comfort zone. But I think what people tend to do is then they look at their co-workers getting promotions and, or they look at the neighbors and they've got the new car and the new things. And it's like, define what success means to you. And like you just said then, if you are not somebody that is very driven and you're quite happy just in your career and that's not important to you, that's fantastic. Health self-awareness to be like, this is me. But then don't beat yourself up when you're looking at, Barbara over the fence who's just got a brand new car and keeps on getting promotions, right? Like you've got to really know who you are. And I think self-awareness is such an absolute skill in this modern world because we are constantly marketed to every single day. All you've got to do is open your phone, look at social media, and instantly you can feel like a failure. So it is really sort of understanding who you are, your values, because we will all be led by our values, and not, like you say, not define success based on someone else's definition of it, which I think is what unfortunately a lot of people do. But I agree. If you want to be successful, if you want to have a successful business, a successful career, there is a level of work ethic, ambition, tenacity, and drive that you do need to succeed. And you just said then that you've got 2 children, as has Pam. What does it take to, like, do you believe in a work-life balance? Do sometimes things got to give? Because there'll be a lot of women listening to this that have got young families. How have you gone about balancing a big role at Google, now starting your own business with a young family? What's that look like for you?
So I would love to hear someone else on a podcast talking about this. And Pam, I'd love your perspective also as someone growing a business with a young family. I think this idea of work-life balance, I don't have it figured out. I don't think I have a good answer for this. I think that balance comes and goes, and priorities are really important. It's like, I remember after having my first child and I went back to work, like every minute was valuable. And I talked to a lot of women who've been out of the workforce for a while, like they've had kids and they're like, oh, I'm having a hard time selling myself, getting things done. And I'm like, if you have a parent and you tell a parent you have 15 minutes of undivided time for you without a kid interrupting you, that parent is going to get so much stuff done. So I think priorities just change in how I work, and it ebbs and flows by the day or week or month. Like I just had my mom visiting from the US, and my sister and her family came out from the US, and I was like, this is my priority. And being really clear with yourself on the trade-offs. It's like the previous example with, work ambition. Just being clear that, my relationship with my partner might take a backseat, or my job and my progression might take a backseat, or I right now want to double down on my partner and my kids, and other things are going to go. I'm not going to get to that house project or those things that were on the bottom of my to-do list, because you can't do it all. There's really just only so much time. So it's for me, it's been a massive exercise in prioritization, and a game of, just a big puzzle. I don't know if it's chess or it's a big puzzle to navigate with my partner, who I'm fortunate to have an amazing partner in this, just navigating through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can absolutely relate to that. And it's been a journey for me as well. And I think there was a point in time when I had my first daughter and when I navigated back to work at that time, I really tried to do it all. And it was very many months down the line, probably a year, before I realized that I wasn't doing anything right. and I was completely overwhelmed, and I was literally approaching burnout. I honestly had the worst anxiety because I was trying to prioritize my marriage, doing an absolute rubbish job at that. Sorry, Jamie. I was honestly trying to be a really good mum. I was trying to allocate that time, but work really did take up too much time. I had to be at work physically 5 days a week. And because I was thinking about everything else, I wasn't doing that well at work either. And just everything was off kilter. And I think what I've came to realize is that, of course, you can have it all. You can have it all. You can do it all. But there's certain sacrifices that have to be made along the way. And that's a priority shift. You just need to make sure that you've not got, all the stove burners firing at all the one time. You need to dull them down, you need to turn them back up. And I've recently had my second daughter, Sky, and last week was an absolute disaster for me. I class myself as someone that's very much got their shit together. I'm usually emotionally quite strong, and last Wednesday I absolutely did have a cry. I just felt so completely overwhelmed with everything, and I was really trying to do a lot, but I think that now I'm very much in tune with that, allow myself to feel that overwhelm, speak out loud why I'm feeling that, and make sure that, as you say, absolutely adjust those priorities and make sure that I'm just showing up with my own core values in mind as well. I think that when you're not operating, true to who you are and what's important to you, I think that's when your life can really fall. The balance, that wonderful word, balance, can really fall off and slide. But I think it's just really important to also surround yourself by other women or other working individuals that are experiencing similar pressures, because sometimes you can feel quite alone, and you need not, because there's so many other people out there that are really trying to juggle a lot. And the reality is, if you love your career, you also get to love having a family as well, and they're struggling to juggle, and that's okay. But you can have it all. I think that is the key thing. You can have it all, but you just need to be prepared to make sure that you're constantly working on what is going to be a priority for you. And as you say, that can change on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and just keep in check with that.
Yeah. An analogy I heard that I really love is life is constantly this juggle of however many balls are important to you. Maybe you have a partner, maybe you have maybe you're studying, maybe you have kids, maybe you have parents to take care of, your job, all these things. And some of those balls are rubber, but one or two of those balls might be glass. And you know what? You can drop some of the rubber ones. That's fine. They'll bounce. You'll pick them back up. The glass ones, you want to be a little bit more careful not to drop, And so thinking about, whether it's kids or partner or other things, like the job stuff is probably a rubber ball. There's some people that argue it's glass. I'd push you to rethink that. It's probably a rubber ball. But
unless you're a brain surgeon.
Unless you're in some of those jobs. But to really push to think what really in this moment, and maybe they're not always glass. Maybe this month it's glass and maybe it's not. But just to constantly reprioritize and to know, I think to your point, Pam, you're not alone. Anyone who's in a career is facing a juggle, and they don't even need to have kids to face the juggle. But everyone is facing this level of juggle. Same thing with promotion. It's so easy to look at people and say, well, wow, that came so easy to them. Wow, look at how well they're doing. If they're progressing, they've had failures. If they're progressing, they're getting really difficult feedback. Everyone's having challenges. And so you're not alone with that.
I know there'll be so many women listening to this that would just be like, oh my God, thank you for talking about this. Thanks for having such an open, honest conversation. And, I'm not a mum, and that's why I think, like, I look at Pam sometimes and I'm just so inspired by, how she just sort of keeps it all together. And look, at the end of the day, I also think that the way I look at things is life is seasonal. And, there are seasons in life where you go, right, now I am business because I really want to make this work. And I presume this is going to be your season for you. So I love to sort of go into what you're up to next. And then there's going to be seasons in life where it's a bit more family, or it's a bit more travel, So I think, it's not trying to, if you're in a season of business, but you're still trying to be, everything to everyone else, then there's going to be some conflict there. So you just figure out what season you're in. And also, like you say, I love the way the analogy of the different balls. And sometimes those balls will go from rubber to glass. Like if you're, for example, in your career and you're working on a really challenging project, right? And there's a deadline, you go, right, this has to take my priority right now. So maybe, my daughter or my son's going to have to go to the in-laws for a night or something, just so I can get this done. Right. And it's just being aware, because we can't do it all the time. And it's just making sure that we are, like you say, prioritizing the right things, so our mental health is in a good place. But, Tova, you've had an amazing career. So I'd love to sort of, finish the podcast today talking about what is next for you. And, if there are companies, startups, new founders listening to this right now, how can you help them? And I guess, why should they come and work with you?
Amazing. So, it's so interesting. I don't know if you guys found this as well, but for me to make this leap from such a stable, comfortable place like Google was a really, really big decision, and was one that I thought about for a very long time, probably too long. I should have just had the belief in myself to do it. But I'm so excited. People are like, wow, it's like your first week of not working for them. Like, how does it feel? And I was like, I'm still working. I'm just not getting a paycheck yet. It's thinking about how this is going. And it's doing what I love, and it's doing what I know. And since moving to Australia, I've spent the last couple of years working so closely with startups and talking with them about hiring and representation and their processes and their people and all of that. But now I get to do that full time, and I'm so excited. And so the focus of Series Build is really helping those startups. And it's probably small to medium-sized stage companies. Maybe they just raised some funding, so they're looking to build out the team. They may not have a talent person yet, or an HR person. Maybe they have one talent person. They're looking to build the team, and they want to bring in really great talent. Now, bonus if they also care about having a diverse and a representative workforce, because that's something that I can help with, not just with the people, but also helping with those processes as well. And when I say diversity, it's not just the demographic pieces, it's really the diversity of thought and experience and how to think about candidates differently. And so helping them with placements. So most of the work that I'll be doing is actual recruiting placements, but have been starting to do some work with startups around consulting and help with their processes, with their employee value proposition, their job descriptions, and interview training.
Amazing. A very, very needed service, I would say, because a lot of people are clueless. And again, it's like, you've got your area of expertise is in recruiting, as hiring, as these processes that they can put in place. And it's so important to get right. I think this is what companies don't understand, is that if you get the foundations of your people hiring first, your business is going to grow and grow sustainably. If you constantly hire the wrong people into your business, you could be taking 5 steps forward and 5 steps back, right? It's so important.
10 steps back.
Correct. Yeah. 20, 50, your business could, stop and start. So it's so important to get those foundations right. And I think bringing someone like yourself in that has just got that knowledge and expertise is such a smart move. So where can we send people that want to know more about you? And where should we put people?
Yes. Awesome. So you can reach out to me at tova@seriesbuild.com. And the website launching very soon, seriesbuild.com. And also for women and job seekers, I think one of the things that excites me most about getting into this work, I love working with startups, but I love coaching people through the job process and helping, to your point earlier, Pam, helping set them up for success. I think so often recruiters are like, oh, you're interested in this, I have a role over here, let me set up the interview, versus how can I really understand where you shine, what you're great at, what kind of company you'd be really happy at, and how can I set you up for success in that process? So for job seekers out there, would also love to connect and help you in any way.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
Tova, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. And I wish you all the best with Series Build. It sounds amazing. And we will definitely be cheering you on.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me, you two. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoy these episodes, the number one thing you can do to help us grow and keep spreading our mission and message is to hit the subscribe button. And if you have time, give us a quick rating. Appreciate each and every one of you who tune in every week, and we look forward to bringing you many more episodes this year. Take care.